Hyunwoo is my favorite brawler in all of Eternal Return, and it's kinda obvious why. Hyunwoo gets to smack people around, run people into walls, burst them, but also just be annoyingly tanky, especially with this Tank Hyunwoo build. So let's talk about this build and why it's so effective at the moment. Tank Hyunwoo is focused on building a ton of rare resource-based RNG items. This is the core build that you're going to be originally building as your first 6 items, but the goal is to transition into a bunch of rare material items that you'll be acquiring throughout the match. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit. First, let's talk about the core 6 items that are in your build plan that you'll be building at the start of the game. First things first, let's talk about the weapon. You're going to be building a Divine Fist. Now, Divine Fist is a little bit interesting. It lowers your movement speed, but it gives you a big, powerful auto attack. You have 55 attack power and 39 extra basic attack damage, so all of your hits are going to be doing quite a bit. You're also going to be building an Amazoness armor and a Helm of Banneret. Amazoness armor and Helm of Banneret are both items that reduce the skill damage that you take. They also give you a little bit of max HP on the Amazoness, some decent defense on both of them, a little bit of movement speed on the Banneret, and some mana and some CDR, some cooldown reduction. So these are just good tanky pieces in general, and they're going to let you survive that early to mid game while you're building all your transition pieces. Now, in addition to those 2 items, you're also going to be building the Sword Stopper. The reason why it's just a little bit different from the 2 I just mentioned is this decreases damage from basic attacks by a little bit, gives you defense, but mostly it has thorns on it, which reflects some basic attack damage back to your attacker. Also, it is your source of healing reduction until you get something else later on that might give it to you, but this is your main source of healing reduction. Past that, you've got Feather Boots, that's attack speed and good movement speed, and Active Camouflage, which is good max HP and a little bit more defense from basic attacks. So overall, as you can see on most of these pieces, very defensive stats. And the reason why you want defensive stats is because you want to be tanky. You do not want to be getting bursted down very fast, because as you get your main transition piece, you will start doing damage essentially for free. Now, of course, I am talking about Mark of the Phoenix. This is the thing that really enables this build. Mark of the Phoenix is a 40 attack power glove with a unique passive of Smolder. Smolder makes all of your basic attacks burn your opponents for 4 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. So you can apply this debuff 4 times at a time. Smolder deals true damage equal to 1% of the enemy's max HP each second. What this means is that by sticking to your targets and auto-attacking them, you're going to be slowly burning down their health bar based on max HP, not based on your scaling at all. So it doesn't matter what your offensive stats are, since you're going to be dealing a lot of damage through this free damage on your weapon. Now, granted, you're going to be getting more damage from other transition pieces down the line, but this is why we're not building a lot of amp or a lot of crit or any of those other scaling stats, because most of your damage is not going to come from scaling. It's going to come from item passives like this. So Mark of the Phoenix is the main reason why we end up in Cemetery so early in the game. It's also the main reason why we're trying to build some items that are very easy and quick to build leading up to that Cemetery tree spawning, because you need this Tree of Life to build the Mark of the Phoenix, so you need to be in Cemetery to fight over that first tree. If you don't get it, it's no big deal. We have some other options, but that's the main reason why. Now, as much as I would like to stall talking about RNG items, that is actually the most important thing I need to talk about when it comes to this build. So let's talk about RNG materials and Tank Hyunwoo. RNG, or rare materials, are classified as different from regular materials because they do not spawn in the containers spread throughout the map. These materials will really only ever spawn on contestable objectives like Alpha, Omega, Wickeline, or in a harvestable form, rarely across the map in the form of a Tree of Life or a meteor that spawns on the ground. Since these are all objectives that can be fought for and will probably only show up after most people have their builds created, they lead to creating some really high-powered gear, and Hyunwoo, of all characters, actually holds a lot of this gear really well, and knowing exactly which materials to build into what pieces of RNG gear is incredibly important to playing Tank Hyunwoo. So for Hyunwoo's RNG materials, let's start first with the gloves. The two RNG gloves you should be aware of are Mark of the Phoenix. We already talked about this one. This is the one that applies that burn. We also have Imperial Silk gloves, aka Mithril gloves. These gloves give Hyun a large amount of attack power and good movement speed, which are both fantastic stats for him. And if you don't manage to get the Mark of the Phoenix, if the tree is contested and you cannot win that fight, it's okay to go for Imperial Silk gloves instead because they're still pretty good too. For chest pieces, you're going to want to look at Mithril armor as your main transition piece. And after that, if you don't manage to get a Mithril, you can also look towards Blazing Dress, which applies an AoE damage around him, which basically gives you some extra damage on Hyun, but it sacrifices essentially all defensive stats aside from 30 defense in order to get it. So it's good, but it's not quite as good as Mithril armor in my opinion. Now, it's not an RNG material, but you can also go for EOD suit instead, which in my opinion is a pretty solid alternative to Amazonas if you're dealing with less casters and more auto attackers. For headpieces, I would highly recommend transitioning to an Elysian Halo if you manage to get a Force Core. If you don't get a Force Core though, you can always go for Mithril Helmet as a solid alternative to the banneret you are going to be starting with. As well as if you get an extra blood sample, you could go for a Chinese Opera Mask. But in order of importance, I'd say it's Halo over Mithril Helm over Chinese Opera Mask. For your arm slot, your main transition pieces are going to be Auto Arms as your highest priority, followed by Mithril Shield. You could also go for a Tellurian Timepiece if you felt like it, but it's not the biggest priority compared to Mithril Shield. Also, additionally, you could go for a Prominence as well. I actually like Prominence a lot more than Mithril Shield, so if you happen to get an extra blood, that's pretty good, but keep in mind your first blood should go to another thing we're going to talk about in just a moment. Now for shoes, you have a couple of transition options. The main one is actually not even listed here because it crafts out of a piece of food, believe it or not. It's actually going to be Taproots. Taproots give you 300 max HP, a good amount of movement speed, and increases all healing by 25%. This includes food healing as well as Hyun passive healing. This is by far best in slot for Hyun, but your alternatives if you don't get those for transition pieces would be Mithril Boots, which I think are fantastic. The highest movement speed in the game for a regular non-legendary shoe, and some attack speed and some defense, pretty good. And of course, Boots of Hermes, also some of the fastest shoes in the game, gives a ton of defense, 35, by far the most defense. So your three main options for shoes are going to be Taproots, Mithril Boots, and Hermes Boots. And last but not least, for your accessory slot, I would highly recommend transitioning to a Sanguine Gunbai if you manage to get the VF blood sample, either from a late game bear, a box, or from Wiccaline. Sanguine Gunbai gives you extra movement speed because of Swift Strides, gives you CDR and healing reduction, and because of Swift Strides, you get a nice little extra attack proc when you hit someone with an auto attack after charging up that extra, movement distance with the Swift Strides. Sanguine Gunbai is an incredibly powerful piece of gear on Hyunwoo, and I highly recommend it, but there are some alternatives too. If you can't quite get that blood, you can switch to a Kundala. This gives you max HP, movement speed, and some spell amp. It makes your E hit a lot harder and even gives you some extra damage on your auto attacks with that Biotic Infusion. And also, another alternative is to go for a Lunar Embrace, which crafts out of a Moonstone, which is basically out of a meteorite. Lunar Embrace is a great option if you're dealing with a lot of amp-based characters. So that just about covers the main build and the transition piece part of this tutorial. You're gonna need to know that information, but at the very least, if that felt a little overwhelming and you don't want to pay attention to all the things I just talked about, here's an example build of a fully transitioned Hyunwoo. If I see this Hyunwoo charging at me, I am terrified. This is essentially where you would like to be in the late game. This is a fully transitioned Mark of the Phoenix, Mithril Armor, Elysian Halo, Auto Arms, Taproot, and Sanguine Gunbai full late game Hyunwoo build. If some of your stuff won't look like this, that's okay. It's going to be hard to get all these RNG materials, but this should be the focus for you going through the game, getting as many of these pieces as possible. And if you don't quite hit those pieces, again, you can default to some of the other things we talked about earlier. There's very few RNG materials that don't just work fine on Hyun. Almost every RNG piece of gear actually works fine on Hyunwoo. He holds this gear so well. So by all means, just experiment with some other stuff if you don't necessarily find the ones we just talked about. But here's an example of a perfectly built transitioned Hyunwoo. Now for the routing, This is actually where you can be a little bit more freeform. I personally am starting factory, going alley, and then TPing to cemetery. That way I'm ending in cemetery for that tree contest. But if you're not as worried about contesting tree, you don't necessarily have to do it in that order. You can do cemetery, factory, alley, or alley, cemetery, factory, doesn't matter. As long as you get these first 3 zones done, that is the good stuff. After that, you can go to pond, where you're going to be getting your hat and your box for your active camouflage. And at that point, all you're missing is a windbreaker. So you can go to school, hotel, or uptown. Either of these are fine because any of them have a windbreaker. Hyunwoo skilling is actually a little bit weird. You're gonna put 3 points into your Q early game and then completely pivot to maxing out your E afterwards. Obviously, put a point into your R whenever possible, and then after that, you're gonna be doing 2 points into your passive starting at level 14, and then finishing off your W last. That early game Q damage is really gonna feel good, but the E really starts shining around that mid game point, so that's why you do the early 3 points in Q, but then you don't finish it and instead go for the E, because that's really when the break point is where your E starts being really effective. And that is actually all I'm gonna talk about before we get into this example game. I bet you didn't think a Hyunwoo guide would be this complicated or in-depth, but thank you for staying here with me and suffering through learning all these transition pieces and talking through all that terminology and all that stuff. So thank you for joining me. Let's go check out that example game so you can see how this all plays out and how you can get all those RNG materials and transition into this full tank beast Hyunwoo. Routing a little bit in reverse, but that's fine. I'll have to just make do. Oh, not the night music box, best accessory. It's pretty good. Definitely won't argue with that. Oh shit. Oh, Viral, thank you for the resub, dude. I need you to win this one. Also, make sure you get your chicken protein. Scans without all the zap. Dude, I'm thinking about it. I'm still so thankful I was able to get the name change. Blessed. Been wanting that for so long. Alright, I think it's time to start crafting. Time to get slow. You gotta go slow to get fast, you know? Alright, thank you, Mr. Magnus. Zafneme? It's part of my name. Okay, I think we're good. Does it mean anything? No, it's just part of my name. No, like, my real name. Like, hello, my name is...
생존자가 사망했습니다.
만들기 어려운 만큼 좋은 물건이겠지.
새 금지 구역이 지정되었습니다.
그렇지네.
생존자가 사망했습니다.
네, 잘 됐네. 귀신 같은 건 안 무서워. 사람이 더 무섭거든.
His full name is StarCraft Arizona Zona as fuck. Yeah. That's actually what it stood for. No, you're right. I wouldn't lie to the people.
만들기 어려운 만큼 좋은
생존자가 사망했습니다. 생존자가 사망했습니다.
이런 것도 만들지네. 직접 걸어가는 쪽이 더 좋은데 어쩔 수 없지. 멋대로 들어가도 되나? 주인장은 없어? 선빵 아니 선찜 필승이거든. 쓸만한 게 있으려나?
There's no reason for gloves to be this hard to find.
이것 때문에
Oh.
밤에 깊게 잘 수가 없어. 빵이다. 자신 있다고? 빵이다.
생존자가 사망했습니다.
사람을 죽였다고? 피할 수 있겠냐?
자, 나갈 시간이다.
인상자는 알겠지?
Wait, why am I carrying meat around? Wait, hold on. This is for viral.
멋대로 들어가도 되나? 주인장은 없어?
How'd it taste?
생존자가
A little bit
새
bloody,
금지 구역이
a
지정되었습니다.
little gross, a little
누군가
raw.
연쇄 처치 중입니다.
Had to be done though.
집중했더니 배고파.
Okay, well we're not finding our... Wait, no, we did find it. Never mind. I'm completely dumb.
꼭
I should get some actual food because I'm still eating honey garlic, which I should probably be off of by now. For the most part, build's looking pretty good. I'll just go forest.
직접 걸어가는 쪽이 더 좋은데.
Make some herbs and eggs.
어쩔 수 없지. 이럴 정도로 바보는 아니거든.
Oh, nice juke. Oh, Hyunwoos.
그래도 꽤 쓸만해 보여.
Let's fight, let's fight.
생존자가 사망했습니다.
그 생각은 없었어.
Ah, the Hyunwoo leapfrog, ancient technique passed down from Hyun to Hyun.
만들기 어려운 만큼 좋은 물건.
So true.
인상자는 아니겠지?
생존자가 사망했습니다. 누군가가 연쇄 처치 중입니다. 이제 생존자가 10명 남았습니다.
피할 수 있겠냐? 왜 자꾸 달려드는 거야? 길 잃을 정도로
Okay, honestly,
아니거든?
I'd rather just have a bunch of drinks.
쓸만한 게 있으려나?
Honey God's still in the game? Yeah. It sure is.
생존자가 사망했습니다.
이것 때문에 밤에 깊게 잘 수가 없어. 이런 걸 살림욕이라고 하냐?
Whoa. Grab, thank you.
어디서 쌀을 마냐? 인간 죽이기 싫어.
새 금지 구역이 지정되었습니다.
이런 걸 살림욕.
Honestly, what do I even want to do with the Foursquare on this build? I'm like trying to think.
뭘좀 남기.
Probably boots of Hermes? Maybe? Even then,
생존자가
Yeah, no, you're right. It's auto arms. I kind of completely blanked out on auto arms even existing. Yeah, it's auto arms. Yo, have a good one, Abigail. Here's your soft fly again. It is for sure auto arms. Unless we could go for a blazing dress, but I feel like we don't need to. Like, it wouldn't be the worst option, but yeah. I think I'd rather have the auto arms. Check over here. Use the heal reduction. That's true. I mean, but the thing is that you can always just hold on to the sword stopper just in case you run into a matchup where it's like, man, I really need X, you know? Really need to deal with this guy's healing or whatever. Is that leather over there? Whoa. Oh. Wait, I don't know my E. Oh, that's unfortunate.
이쯤 되면 누군가 시비를 걸어와야 합니다. 빵이다.
새 금지 구역이 지정되었습니다. 이걸 이겼지. 생존자가 사망했습니다. 누군가가 연쇄 처치 중입니다.
I mean, I don't care you passive. I do, right now. Your E and your Q are more important. So you generally want them for your like early game damage. Plus keep in mind, this thing scales off of your max HP. And you're not really going to have a ton of max HP in the early game. So you want to make sure that like, it just doesn't really get as much use until like the later parts of the game where you have like more max HP, essentially. But your early game damage with your Q and your E are the most important, so that's why you want to get both your Q and your E maxed out before your passive. Doesn't matter how long you live in the fight if you die, because you can't kill them. Wait, hold on. I'm good. Floor burger. Would you max your E or your Q depending on your playstyle early game? A lot of Hyunwoos prefer to do a bit of a mixture. They prefer to do 3 points in Q and then max your E and then finish your Q. I see that like a lot, like that's pretty standard stuff. Do I swap to crown here? I kind of feel like I do.
직접 걸어가는 쪽이 더 좋은데 어쩔 수 없지.
I don't know. Hyunwoo aficionados in the chat. Any preferences on crown here? I don't think the difference is all that huge. I think it's like pretty marginal. I'm curious if you guys have any takes on it. Ooh, definitely take those. I've mastery tall soon. Yeah, that's a serious cap. Banner for movement speed? That's pretty true, actually. I do agree with that. That's probably the most compelling argument. Wits and Sem. I should probably get there. I definitely want to be posturing around quick. There's the 14. She doesn't look like she's aggroed. Oh, there's the aggro.
약품만 챙기고 빨리 나가자. 이 물은 마셔도 되는 건가? 먹을 건 없냐? 끝나는 게 있으려나? 이것 때문에 안에 깊이 수도 없었지. 잠깐 쉬는 건
You always build the 1000s? Wait, hold on. I recently found out not all characters need hot honey water. Or Americanas or purified water. Would you go for green SPIs? Yeah, so like, see, if your mana pool's around 600, think of it this way. If your mana pool's around 600, you'll generally drop down to about 200 before your like mana should probably drink something. At that point, if you're drinking hot honey water or you're drinking, you know, like a regular honey water, it doesn't really make a difference. And a large quantity of regular honey water would end up giving you essentially way more mileage over time. Once you spread it out more thin, rather than just like having these big bursts. Let's go for the gold box. Damn, that Luke is deep in the red. Yummy. We definitely go for that. Over the banneret. We're kind of golding out of our minds right now. Yeah, we can't go for the Taproot. And I'm not sure if I want it over Mithril Shoes. I actually don't know if I like Taproot over Mithril Shoes on Tank Hyun. It's pretty close. Mithril Shoes are just so fast. It is really nice with passive, I'll agree with that.
잠깐 쉬는 건 괜찮겠지?
But it's definitely really good. Hard to argue with that.
조심하지. 꼭 해초리 같네.
생존자가 사망했습니다. 최종 생존자가 3명 남았습니다.
That eye is concerning.
생각보다 어려운데?
Any late game air eye is concerning.
자꾸 달려드는 거야? 소독약 냄새가
Grab the potatoes?
뭘 좀
Could do potatoes. Yeah, you're right. Honestly, my food's pretty decent. I'm not really worried. Should probably be a little bit worried, but not too worried.
먹을 건 없나?
새 금지 구역이 지정되었습니다.
Damn. So the Luke is right there on the gold box.
이거 마음대로 만져도 되는 거야?
What do you get?
안전되고
Cabana?
그런 거 아니야?
Blazing dress. I don't want that.
생존자가 사망했습니다. 누군가가 연쇄 처치 중입니다. 최종 생존자가 2명 남았습니다.
그러게 덤비지 말았어야지. 소독약 냄새가 지독해. 잠깐 쉬는 건.
Do we go to Scotty here? I don't think we do. I think we just stay on that arm. I think our HP's good enough. I do feel like we lose this final fight though. ARI, even though we're like transitioned out of our mind, ARI is terrifying. Not a good matchup.
소독약 냄새가 지독해.
Especially an ARI with 6 kills already. Like, the mastery farm is insane.
뭘 좀 남기고 돌아가시나? 피할 수 있겠냐? 너희 한번 공격해봐. 빵 필승! 달려드는
He's huge, yeah, he is pretty huge.
잠시 후 임시 안전지대가 활성화됩니다.
Oh fuck. Nice, we got there anyways. So yeah, that's Tank Hyunwoo.
섬을 지배하고 있습니다.
이제 좀 쉬었어.